Hey, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about scrims versus softbox. So this is like the next video along in my series about lighting. We've already got one about all the different lighting modifiers that I use, one about choosing your softbox size. So the next logical step is choosing whether you should be using a softbox or a scrim. Now, I get asked this a lot because softboxes are expensive, they're cumbersome, storage-wise are a bit of a nightmare of them hanging on walls and stuff like that. Whereas a scrim, it's a simple roll of paper, or Roscoe scrim or ice scrim, something of those sorts, with either a bare bulb, a spill on a light behind it, or sort of a gridded or a gridded modifier attached to that spill. Now, straight off the bat, softboxes are great, and they're great because they're portable, they're versatile, they're easy to move, they're easy to maneuver, they're easy to get cool angles with. They're pretty affordable, really, for what they are, and there's a lot to be said for a good softbox. However, a softbox is kind of an off-the-peg lighting. A softbox is an off-the-peg lighting answer. It is a scrim, often a sort of specular, which is that like tin-foily looking interior, another scrim, and then the light. And the problem with this is you can't adjust the distance from the light to the front scrim or the angle it hits the center. And obviously the bigger they get, the more sort of uneven that light is. It'll be hot in the middle, cool at the outsides. Now, technically speaking, that's frowned upon. However, the aesthetic it creates can actually be quite nice. So it has its place. Now, the scrim and like bare bulb or spilkle, on the other hand, it gives you a much more sort of broader scope to play with. You can have the light in the top corner, the bottom corner, the center. You can pull it back to focus it by bringing it back and forth. There's a lot of room for maneuver within that. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of how I use them, and some images where I've used either a scrim and a light or a softbox, and explain how and why I've done it and what the difference it allowed me to create is. Because as with most things, doing a series of test shots isn't going to help, because just because I show you that it looks nicer with a scrim on one particular example, it doesn't mean it's always going to be the answer to your question. So I find it a much better idea to understand how and when to use the light rather than test sheets and, just general comparisons where it's a very sanitized test that it doesn't really answer any real world questions. Now, although I use the Roscoe paper a lot as well, I also use tracing paper. And I'm going to pop a link to it in the description below, because if you're hard up on money, this is the cheapest way to modify lights. I'm also going to show you how I set them up and why I do it in the way I do, so you can get a bit of an idea as to how to work with this. So here we are at the beginning. This is the first setup. We've got a Broncolor Pulso head going into a Godox softbox. You'll have seen in the time lapse at the start that I really struggled to put a softbox together. That softbox has now been hidden, and we've ended up with a Godox one. Not the best softbox in the world. It's pretty cheap and nasty, but it does the job for this particular thing. So I'm going to go because I've gone for a cheap softbox, I'm going to go for cheap scrim as well and use tracing paper. And then, because I know everyone's going to ask, I'm also going to use the Broncolor Hazy at the end just to do a comparison. Not sure you're going to see the difference in this particular context, but I know it'll be in the comments if not. Anyway, so we've gone for a shot here of some flumps, which are like a British sweet. They might be called other things elsewhere. They're basically marshmallows. Taste pretty good, look pretty good, and fits with my general aesthetic of work. So camera-wise, we're going for f11, 100 ISO, 125th of a second, 100mm Zeiss Milvus lens into the Canon 5DSR, which I've got rigged up there, mains powered, PC sync cable to the flash packs, all very much wired in, as it were, so we have nothing to go wrong. So I've got the shot with the reflector. I'm going to take one without as well, just to be sure it's not jading my sort of review at the end of this, and then let's crack on to the next image. So I've kept the light in the same place. I've taken the spilkle off. It's just bare bulb at this point, and we're going into the scrim, and the interesting thing is we've lost a lot of power. So I had to increase the power on the pack. Now, I've not moved it at all, but we do have a different look. The next thing I'm going to do is add a specular spilkill onto this head, and then we're going to start really playing with this. So we've added the spilkill, which is this bit here, also known as a reflector. This is a pretty deep one, and it's quite specular. Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of you might not have expected is that it increased the power of the flash. Well, it didn't really increase the power of the flash. It put more light onto the subject. So we've had to dial the flash back down again. Obviously, without this, the flash is just going everywhere. But with this, we've got a bit more control going on. And then the next shots we've done is I've moved it further back from the scrim, which is obviously not possible with the softbox. You sort of stuck with what you've got. And we did it without a grid and with a grid. So the last couple of shots I've popped this on. So when we jump onto the computer to compare them all, we should see some pretty stark differences. The last thing I'm going to do now is bring out the hazy to get one comparison shot. And then we're going to jump into the computer and crack on with looking at what we can do with each light. And then I'm going to show you some real life situations where I've used different ones to create different looks on different jobs. And the last light is the hazy. And I've had to go for a slightly deeper f-stop. So I've gone for f13 because this light, even on its minimum power, hits f13 at this distance. But there we go. Let's go and jump into the computer and have a look at what we've won. So here are our winnings. Let's have a quick skim through these. So we've got softbox with no reflector, softbox with a reflector, got the scrim using the reflector, a scrim with no reflector, a spill kill moved back a little bit with a reflector, a spill kill with no reflector, then we've got a gridded reflector, and then all the way back to the hazy. Now, there are so many variables when you're using a scrim. So many that the scrim on its own is going to have its own video rather than this scrim v softbox setup going on here. So for now, we're just going to look at these images to give you an idea as to what they do before I talk to you about some real images that I've taken in real shoots for real clients and explain what I've used and why. So the softbox off the peg with no reflector. It's nice, it's punchy, it's contrasty, it is diffused, it's a decent soft light. There's a bit of weird fall off at the bottom. It's not particularly even. But then when we add the reflector in, that's pretty pleasing light. Then when we move over to the scrim, what I want to do here is just compare these two. So we've got the scrim here with the reflector and the softbox with the reflector. See the difference in colours? Now the flash colour accuracy is pretty good. So this is caused by the modifying materials. Now this is less diffused, mostly down to there being a missing layer of diffusion. There's 2 layers of diffusion in the softbox and only 1 within the scrim, but I could have doubled it up. But it's, it's a decent chunk of light. Now, when we look at the scrim with no reflector, just the bare ball light, look at how punchy these shadows are. In contrast, do the X and Y doodah. So this is softbox with no reflector over here, and this is scrim with no reflector. It's very close, like very, very close. But it just feels a little bit more punchy to me, and that could be down to the colour balance change. Now this is when we pop the spill kill on and we move the light a bit further back. Now this is something you can't do with the softbox. The softbox, the light is it is where it is in conjunction to the front of the softbox, whereas this way we have the scrim in exactly the same place as before, but we move the spill kill further back. So if you look here, just see how the shadows change and the highlights change going from here where it's quite close, the same distance as the softbox, to bringing that light back. Well, that is quite a big change, especially when we take the modifier away. It's a much harder light. There's a lot more dense shadow going on here, which is interesting because when we look at the softbox, it's a softbox with no reflector, and this is the spill kill moved further back through the diffusion with no reflector. It's a very different look from here to here. But obviously with the scrim, we still have the ability to have that very similar, like homogeneous lighting that you can get from a softbox. After this, I added a grid, and this gives us a whole new ballpark to play with. Now I left the light where it was, and obviously I could have moved it closer, further away. There's so much you can do with this. And this is no reflector. I've labeled these wrong. This is the no reflector. And this one here is with the reflector. Very, very, very small difference here because the light beam is barely hitting that reflector. But you see here how it's quite even, and especially going back to like the softbox. And then once we get into this territory, we're just picking out those top ones, but it's still a diffused light. It's very interesting. I think there's a lot you can do with this sort of thing. And then I'm just going to move on to the hazy light, which is a very different colour again. This is not really a time when I'd use a hazy light actually. And then hazy light with no reflection. For those who are interested, let's just go to the grid.
we'll take the hazy light with the reflector and the softbox with the reflector, just so you can see them side by side. So softbox on the right, hazy light on the left. See if these will load. I'm doing a screen recording whilst trying to open a 50 megapixel image, or two 50 megapixel RAW images. There we go. How are we doing on this side? Come on. My laptop's making its money today. There we go. It's very similar. It's very similar indeed. The colours are slightly different. The fall off of light is slightly different. I try to get them as accurate as possible. But I think the big noticeable thing is that it's perhaps a little bit more evenly lit with the hazy light. But again, this is not really the time when you choose a hazy light over a softbox necessarily. If we look down to these shadows here, it's pretty similar. Now, considering the hazy light when it was brand new was £10,000 and the softbox when it was brand new was £80. And that's a big price difference considering there's not a great deal of difference in this particular setting. And then just going back to the scrim versus the softbox. Again, very, very similar, slight difference in colours. And again, this is why these sorts of test shoots don't really give you the whole picture. So let me jump in to some real images that I've taken and explain what and why I did what I did. Okay, let's start off here. This one here was using just a strip box or a soft box. And you can see it's really hard punch of light down the side. It was used for effect. If we did a scrim for this, there'd be gradation, there'd be all sorts of different things going on. For this particular shot, we didn't want that. I wanted it to be hard and punchy and very purposeful, I guess. And that's what gave me this aesthetic. Now, this one here was shot with scrims, and it wasn't a creative decision. The decision was based upon the fact that we had to travel light, and we didn't have the room as well for the softboxes. So a roll of scrim and a load of heads, it gave us that ability and let us move the light closer and further away to control the shadow fall off, which is very useful in a small space because the softbox would have just filled the space. But this way, a little bit more versatility going on. Now, this one here was shot for the same client. This is a European Christmas scene, not English, European, like France, Spain, that sort of thing, which is where there's slightly different settings going on with a glitter cannon as well. Now, this is a pretty wide shot. We're up on a ladder, and I would have needed perhaps 4 softboxes, and we couldn't travel with that many softboxes, so we used something like 8 Elinchrom heads, and I think we hid them behind scrims to try and get the even light. And again, it was a practical decision rather than a creative one. The softboxes could have done the job here, but for practical reasons, we used the scrim. You'll also notice that, like with these highly reflective stars, if we had have used the softboxes, we wouldn't have got this perfect white and perfect silver. There would have been like black parts and all the rest of it. So perhaps the scrim would have been the choice anyway, but the reason we actually chose it was not creatively, it was because of what we had to play with on the day. Now, in stark contrast, this time here, I wanted those punchy catch lights. So the softbox was the better choice. If I'd have used the scrim, it would have been much like with the beer photograph at the start. I wanted the punch, and if I had have used the scrim, it would have been a bit too wishy-washy, not quite. Then I wanted that punch in those cherries. It's such a soft image apart from the cherries. But with contrast with this one here now, I really wanted to control the light, and I used bits of black card and scrim paper. Then I moved the black card, so we've got this natural vignette created by it, and then the scrim down the side. Yes, could have done it with a softbox and some bits of black card, but it made more sense to do it this way, and then I could still have a slightly hard, punchy light by pulling the head further away from the scrim paper than a softbox would allow for. Now, this one here was a scrim job, and the reason it was a scrim job was because of the fact that we had to recreate somebody else's shoot, and they shot it in a space that we didn't shoot it in. We had to shoot it on a location. The location wasn't big enough to create the light source that they had, so we had to build it from scratch. Because of that, we actually used softboxes with the baffles removed and then added a scrim paper nearer to the image to help with the shadows. And it was quite a difficult task to do because they used very different modifiers in a very different space, but did what I could with what we had, and we managed to recreate the lighting exactly as we needed it to be whilst using completely different modifiers. Now, in contrast to the beer shot, here we've got the gradation. This is like a bit of a GQ style shoot done with Natalie, and we really wanted the gradation on the glass to be quite dominant because it's such a monochromatic image almost, and it's all very subtle, and then we needed that little bit of punch just to make it work visually. But if we'd have gone for the solid like wedge of light, it'd have been overkill and too much and not in keeping with the rest of the image where we've got gradations going throughout it. So this way, the scrim and the softbox, I'm going to do a video showing you how to do this, was really useful. I've also got a behind the scenes video of this. If you head to my behind the scenes playlist, you can see exactly how we lit this. Now this one here is softbox and scrim because I needed the light to be close for the fall off, but it wasn't diffused enough. So I added more diffusion by adding more scrim, which sort of like scatters the light even more. And you can see it's still pretty punchy. And, it could have done with maybe more diffusion even on top of that, but worked with what I had. And it allowed me to have the deep shadows whilst keeping these highlights here as diffused as possible. And that was important in this shot. And then here, this is when I've used the hazy light when I need that really homogeneous light, that crisp but still diffused light, which seems like it's a contradiction in itself, I know, but hopefully visually you can see how it works really well here compared to what a softbox would do. And this time here, again, a scrim and a softbox for really soft light. I actually ended up using, I think it was like a 2.5 meter by 1.5 meter softbox for the softness in terms of size relative to subjects. That's what creates the softness. And then an extra scrim to give it even more diffuse sort of properties to the light. And look how just clear the glass is and how soft the light is, the fall off, the shadows. Very pleased with that shot. Whereas in stark contrast, this one here, we just used the big softbox, plonked it down, came in from the right hand side, straight across the image, did the job. I didn't need to add more diffusion. I didn't need more control. It worked as it was. And because we're working at speed and we needed to get a lot done, it's much easier to bang up an off the peg softbox than it is to start building scrims and all the rest of it. So there's many reasons apart from aesthetic why you might choose a different light source. Now, the scrim itself is so versatile, I'm going to do a whole other video on just scrims because there's so much you can do with it. But hopefully between these comparisons, you can sort of get an idea as to what you can and can't do.
So I hope that's been of use, and I hope you can see the difference as to when and how you might choose a softbox or a scrim, and the benefits and the drawbacks of all of them. And, just helps you make an educated decision on what either you should buy next or what you should use if you already have both options. If you're enjoying these videos, do hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.